The game between Ben 622 and Parpin, played in Team 45-45 League Event Team 52, Week 5. I posed a question here in the game forum, and it suggested that perhaps White had lost 4 tempos, and could you identify them? And this is the position where White has lost his 4 tempos. It's not entirely obvious here where those 4 tempos are unless you've played over the game. So let me just show you. Actually, yeah, I'll go ahead and show you. Okay, the white pawn on h3, the white pawn on a3, and the other two are kind of surprising and they're not obvious, but it's the knights on f3 and c3. And you say, how is that? They're on their original squares, their best developed squares. Well, actually, if you play over the game, the knights come from the opposite side of the board. The knight on f3 is the queen's knight, and it got there by going from b1 to d2 and to f3. And the knight on c3 got to e2 and c3. Now, this doesn't mean that White could have played there directly. We can look at that when we play over the opening moves, but it does say that those pieces did take 2 moves to get to those squares that normally they would reach in 1. So you might not think of it that way when you're playing a game where you've moved your knights like this, and it's rare that this happens, but it does happen, and it's something you should consider if you're spending your time moving your knights around, that hey, maybe something else is lacking here and I got to get my other pieces into play. And just one final comment here in this position. Looks like every black piece is in action except for the black queen on d8. It's undeveloped, but it has some scope. It has 2 diagonals, and it could even transfer to e8 and have another diagonal at its disposal. The white side, most of the queen side is undeveloped. I've mentioned earlier, look at all the positions of games you've played where the white queen bishop and queen rook remain on their original square. And I suggested that perhaps if you do this, you're giving your opponent the odds of a bishop and a rook. Why didn't White develop those? Well, obviously he should have, and when we go over the opening sequence, we'll look at some alternatives he could have had. Okay, let's take this to the beginning and have a look. Okay, why do I have leg? You're already on the main line. Okay. All right. French defense. And this is I mentioned in the notes, this is a tricky opening. If white or black is not prepared, they can find themselves with a winning or losing game very quickly. Generally speaking, myself, I'm not an expert in the French defense. I have lines. If I play e4 as white, I have lines that I have prepared that give black an equal game, but they get him more into a position of my liking. And even if black is comfortable in that position, I don't have a problem with it because I'm playing the same type of position over and over again. And my line is not important. Let's just take a look at what line they selected. Knight d2 is often selected by players of the white pieces to avoid the tricky winner-winner lines. And again, I don't know theory here. I don't think theory is important to know, at least not yet. And we've got the typical formation. White has the pawn chain going from b2 to e5. Black has his French defense pawns on e6 and d5, and the black pawn on c7 is advanced to c5 to counterattack the white center. Okay. No, nothing earth-shattering here. Both sides are playing routine moves. Now, could that knight on e2 could have gone to f3? Well, I don't know. I'm not going to try to analyze all the possibilities out because they aren't important. If you're going to study this opening or this variation as white, yeah, you'd want to find the difference between f3 and e2 for the knight. Beyond the scope of this short discussion, My own general preference, if I was playing a move here, is white. My first instinct candidate moves, I might consider moves like, well, the pawn on d4 is hanging. You might consider putting the knight on f3. Ideally, you might like to play f4 first, just for the fact that it gives you some chances to attack on the king side with f5. But I don't know. It's not important unless you really know opening theory to know what the most precise moves are here. Okay, let's find out what happens next. Okay, there's a pawn exchange. And black begins the thematic counterattacking the white center. Okay. Now, development is still pretty close to even. Black has a backward pawn on e6 on an open file, but this is not really a weakness, because often that pawn will quickly advance to e5 and suddenly all the black pieces come into play. Then it's up to white to prove that the pawn on d5, which is isolated, is a weakness, even though it's a pass pawn. But again, we're not going to try to dissect opening theory here. We're just going to look at the principles of development and consider what possible alternatives there are. Okay, now white comes in and reinforces the pawn on d4, brings a piece over to the king side. Development is still about even, and black takes a diagonal before white does of b8 to h2. Otherwise, white might play bishop from c1 to f4 and command that diagonal for himself. Okay. White castles, nothing wrong with that. Black castles. And this is the point, I believe, let's see. Yeah, don't quite understand that move. I don't know if it's a book move, but let's consider just the position for a moment. Development is pretty even. If you look at the position, it's pretty symmetrical. There's just the change in the pawns on e6 and f2. But both the white queen side and the black queen side are exact matches, and both sides are castles. So the back rank matches. The white bishop on d3 has a twin on d6. The only difference here is that white's knights aren't on c3 and f3 to match the black counterparts, and white elects this move to play knight c3. Is that really wise? Let's just look at the position for a second. That after white did what he did, and it's safe to say after white does this is that black is equalized. Again, it's a symmetrical position. The only difference are these pawns on e6 and f2, and it's black to play. White's given up a lot here. Let's just back it up. Probably better here might be consider a move like bishop f4. What's wrong with that? Ideally, you might want to trade. You want to trade the bishop, which is of the color of your isolated pawn on isolated queen pawn. In this case, white doesn't want to be tied down to guarding that pawn later with his bishop. He wants some mobility. So if he trades it off, and I'm not saying black has to cooperate. We've got to watch out for some tricks here. But if it is traded off, then white will end up with the better bishop. So like I say, we have to watch out for all kinds of tricks and things like that. But another simple move, just to ignore everything, is just play bishop g5. If you play bishop g5, you've got a pin on that knight. You've continued your development. Your rook on a1 is ready to run over to c1 at a moment's notice, and white definitely at least still has an even game here. He's no worse off for playing a move like bishop g5. He needn't worry about black playing moves like h6, because the bishop will just drop back to h4. And if it has to, it can go to g3 in a moment and recapture on g3 if there is an exchange with a knight. And again, white has little fear from trading off the dark squared bishops in this position. So White's knight c3, I question it. If you want to move it again, why not maybe put it on knight g3? What's wrong with that? That's another alternative. But it could have stayed on e2 for another move. Okay. Now black goes ahead, develops a piece. And white kind of makes a natural move, but as it turns out, this is a weakening move because of everything that falls is going to fall on f2. Again, it probably would have been better to just play bishop g5. And black goes ahead and continues his development on the queen side, and now white just starts to self-destruct. Okay, a3 is just simply a very, very poor move to play. Why? Okay, I'll tell you why, at least on my mind. White doesn't want black playing knight b4, kicking that bishop. Well, that's thematic. When it does that, you just drop the bishop back to e1 or b1, and at your leisure, then kick the knight back out of there with a2 to a3, and your bishop is fine. So this was one last chance when white needed to just simply play bishop g5 and continue with a relatively even game, although black has nothing to fear. So a3, just a bad move. And black definitely has a plus after knight g4. White doesn't really think here. It says, gee, knight g4. I'll just kick the knight and make it go back. I've created a little left on the king side for my king, and that'll be my move again. But white didn't even consider what the possibilities are. I don't know what does white do here. Bishop g5, it looks kind of shaky. Bishop e3, that's a bad square for the piece. Black's got a terrific game here. But what happens after h3, not only does it not really help because it doesn't really kick the knight, the white king side just gets very weak, and black has a thematic sacrifice right here that just opens up the game like a can of worms, and white's game just falls to lost very quickly. Knight takes f2. Now, what do you do here? You've given up a clear pawn. Your queen's under attack. White's lost. He accepts the sacrifice. Now here comes a check with tempo. The knight is pinned. It can't take. So he brings the king back to g1. There's really no other good move. And black makes a sacrifice. White can't take with the queen because e1 falls with check. So white's just in a bad way here. Okay, he takes with the pawn, and black just starts checking, picking up pawns with check, attacking the king. Okay, the game ends very quickly, and the sequence of moves isn't all that important. And black didn't even have to see this all the way through. Black can just look brutal moves and say, gee, look, no matter what white does, I'm getting my material back and I'm attacking. Although black is down a rook here, he just sees that there's no safe haven for the white king, and I defy anyone to prove that white could survive this assault. And mate is coming here forced very shortly. It's a terrific attacking game by black. Certainly the 4 tempos are what it took for black to get this. Something to learn from this. Develop your pieces. Always develop your pieces. And the other surprising thing is white took a long time making all those moves. H3 and A3. Just didn't really properly plan for what could happen. Okay, terrific game, Parpin. Thanks for your time. I hope everybody enjoyed my analysis, and more importantly so, the play of the players in this game. Thanks, and see you soon. Bye.